What I Learned Losing $1 Million by Jim Paul and Brendan Moynihan. Picture this. You're standing in an office that looks like something out of a dream. Your desk? It's not just any desk. It's a massive, 7-inch thick slab of rich mahogany that appears to float in midair, held up by nothing but a single copper pedestal rising from the floor. Behind you, there's a matching credenza bolted to the wall, also suspended. No legs, no visible supports, just beautiful wood, seemingly defying the laws of physics. And that's exactly how you feel in this moment, like you're defying gravity itself. You just had the single greatest day of your entire career. In one day, you pocketed $248,000, $250,000. The rush is indescribable. You feel so invincible that God himself might call you up any minute to ask if it's okay to let the sun rise tomorrow. You settle into your chair at that floating desk, perched on the edge, waiting for the market to open. You're ready for another $50,000 payday. You think to yourself, life just doesn't get any better than this. And you know what? You're absolutely right. It doesn't get any better. Because that Monday morning, the market opens down. And it keeps falling, not for days, not for weeks, but for months. That feeling of invincibility, that $250,000 high, slowly and painfully transforms into a relentless grind of losses. $20,000 a day, $25,000 a day, every single day. 75 days later, everything is gone: the money, the career, the club memberships. That gravity-defying desk. Everything. You go from having it all to having absolutely nothing. This isn't some hypothetical cautionary tale. This actually happened to a man named Jim Paul. And today, we're going to explore the profound lessons he learned during that spectacular rise and catastrophic fall, as detailed in his book, What I Learned Losing $1 Million. This isn't just a book about trading or investing. It's a deep dive into the psychology of success and failure. It's a roadmap that exposes the hidden traps our own minds set for us when we start winning. Jim Paul had to lose everything to discover a truth that applies to every single one of us, whether we're in business, in sports, or just navigating everyday life. By the end of our time together, you'll understand the single most dangerous mistake a person can make, not after a failure, but after a success. And you'll learn the one tool that can protect you from it. This is a story about how winning can be the very thing that sets you up for the biggest loss of your life, and how understanding that paradox is the key to true, sustainable success. Jim Paul's epic loss doesn't begin in a high-rise office in Chicago. It begins at a small country club in Kentucky, when he was just 9 years old. Getting a job as a caddy was his first real exposure to money, and it opened his eyes to a world he never knew existed. Back home, life was simple. But at the country club, he watched men like Charlie Robke pull up in a brand-new Cadillac Eldorado convertible, a beautiful woman by his side. Jim didn't know what Charlie did for a living, and honestly, he didn't care. He just knew he wanted what Charlie had. Right there, he learned a lesson that would shape his entire life. It wasn't what you did that mattered. It was how much you got paid for doing it. This idea got reinforced in the caddy pen. While Jim was hauling heavy golf bags for 4 hours to make $2, another kid nicknamed Goose was just pitching nickels against a wall. At the end of the day, Goose had more money than Jim did. Goose worked smarter, not harder. He had everyone's admiration, not because he was particularly good at pitching nickels, but because he had a lot of nickels. So from a young age, Jim Paul was on a mission: make money. He learned to play cards, blackjack, poker, gin. He learned that sometimes the people who win are the ones who know how to bend the rules, or even cheat. Life, he started to see, was a series of games. And if you could figure out the rules of any game, you could win. This perspective followed him to college. The first semester, he was told that freshman English was the flunk-out course. So he studied his tail off, figured out what the teachers wanted, and got a B. He had learned the rules and won the game. But once he was safe, he turned his attention to other things. He and his roommate, feeling like nobodies on the big campus, decided they wanted to join a fraternity. But they didn't have the right clothes, the right connections, or any money. They were, in his words, from hunger. So what did he do? He did something nobody does. He picked up the phone, called the Kappa Sig house, asked for the president, and essentially invited himself to join. He said, "My buddy and I are tired of going to all these parties. We'd like to come over and pick up our pledge pins." And unbelievably, it worked. He had broken the rules and won anyway. This became a recurring theme in his life. He felt different, special. While his friends were flunking out, he was getting by, often without even buying the textbooks. He had a knack for figuring out the system and doing the bare minimum to succeed, or sometimes doing things the wrong way and succeeding anyway. He was building a deep, subconscious belief that the rules didn't necessarily apply to him. This string of successes, this feeling of having a Midas touch, followed him into the professional world. He decided he wanted to be a stockbroker. When he applied for a job, he found out he had to take a personality test called the Minnesota Study of Values. He didn't just take the test. He went to a bookstore, found a book called The Brain Watchers, and studied how to beat it. The test was a game, and he was determined to win. He answered every question to create the perfect butterfly scattergram, the ideal profile for a broker. His score was so perfect it was almost unbelievable. But he got the job. He quickly gravitated toward commodities, because you could make money whether the market went up or down. His career took off. He was smart, charismatic, and producing incredible numbers. He moved to Chicago, the heart of the futures industry. Within 6 months of arriving, he ran for a seat on the board of governors of the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. Everyone else was playing it cool, not wanting to seem too eager. Jim ran hard. He sent letters, he campaigned, and he won in a landslide. Not only that, because he got the most votes, he was also appointed to the powerful executive committee. At 33 years old, he was on top of the world. He was a governor of the exchange, friends with the best traders on the floor, and making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. He had a fancy office, wore expensive suits, and drove a Porsche. He looked in the mirror one day and said to himself, "Life in the fast lane." He had an unbroken string of successes, getting into the fraternity, winning at cards, beating the personality test, getting elected to the board. Everything he touched turned to gold. He started to believe it wasn't luck. It wasn't being in the right place at the right time. It was him. He was special. He had a gift. And this, right here, is the most dangerous belief a person can have. As the book wisely states, success can be built upon repeated failures when the failures aren't taken personally. Likewise, failure can be built upon repeated successes when the successes are taken personally. Jim Paul had started to take every single success personally. He saw them as a reflection of his unique abilities. He didn't know it yet, but he was being set up for a catastrophic fall. The rise had created the perfect conditions for the ruin. With his primary market, lumber, drying up due to high interest rates, Jim needed a new game. He teamed up with a brilliant analyst named Kirby Smith, who was deeply knowledgeable about the grain markets. In the summer of 1982, Kirby became convinced that there was going to be a massive shortage of soybean oil. The supply was tight, and the price, he argued, was going to shoot straight up. Jim didn't know much about soybean oil, other than that it was used to make mayonnaise. But Kirby was brilliant, and soon Jim was a believer too. And when Jim believed in something, he really believed. He got everyone he knew into the trade. His brother, his friends, his clients, even his secretary. The position was a bull spread, and the beauty of it was that you didn't have to put up any money to get in. This allowed them to build massive positions. Jim himself had so many contracts on that the Chicago Board of Trade had to call him and tell him he had exceeded the speculative limit. The summer of 1983 was shaping up to be perfect. The story was working. A major drought was forecast, which would roast the soybean crop and send prices skyrocketing. Jim rented a 45-foot motorhome for the month of August to take his family on a vacation up the East Coast. He had a phone installed so he could keep up with the markets from the road. Picture him, driving down the Jersey Turnpike, drinking a beer, talking on his mobile phone and trading commodities. He felt like the king of the world. Then came Thursday, August 25th. He was at his partner's lake house in Cleveland, sitting on the dock with a, quote, machine and a small refrigerator full of beer. That day, the soybean oil market exploded. The spreads worked like a charm. At the end of the day, Jim Paul had personally made $248,000 in one single day. The calls started pouring in from all over the country. His secretary made $2,400. His partner made nearly $50,000. In total, the group he had brought into the trade was up almost $700,000 in a day. Everyone was telling him how brilliant he was. And he agreed. Yes, I am so smart, he thought. But this is just the beginning. We are all going to get rich. To make things even sweeter, he heard a rumor that the main person on the other side of his trade, the person who was losing all this money, was the legendary trader Richard Dennis, the Prince of the Pit. This was perfect. Not only were they going to be rich, they were going to be famous for taking out a legend. That evening, he picked up a copy of the Robb Report, a magazine for the ultra-wealthy. He started flipping through the pages and seriously contemplated buying a $400,000 luxury motorhome, a Bluebird Wanderlodge, a $500,000 bus. Why? Because he could. He was invincible. The next day, Friday, the market moved his way again. He made another $60,000. The clients were calling again. You guys are so smart. And he agreed with them. That Monday morning, he drove his new Porsche 911 convertible to his magnificent downtown Chicago office. He sat down at his levitating mahogany desk, waiting for the market to open, ready for another huge day, thinking life couldn't possibly get any better. And he was right. It didn't. The market opened down. News of rain in the soybean belt over the weekend spooked traders. Jim wasn't worried. He told himself it was just a minor correction. It's too late in the season for rain to do any good, he rationalized. Then, a Soviet jet shot down a Korean Airlines passenger plane. The markets collapsed on fears of a grain embargo against the Soviets. Jim told himself that was stupid. The market's wrong, he said. We're not going to have an embargo. And he was right. President Reagan refused to disrupt grain sales. The soybean market rallied, but Jim's oil spreads went down again. He kept finding reasons. He kept rationalizing. The oil market had just outperformed. It was resting before the next leg up. The market was wrong, and he was right. One of the oldest rules in trading is this. If a market is hit with very bullish news, and it goes down instead of up, you get out. It means something is deeply wrong. A government crop report came out that was wildly bullish. The damage from the drought was even worse than expected. The market should have soared. Instead, after a brief pop higher, it closed almost limit down. Faced with this massive warning sign, what did Jim do? He held on. He decided the market was wrong. He was not going to let them shake him out of this great position. He had broken the rules before and won. This time would be no different. But it was different. The decline was relentless. Up $10,000 one day, down $25,000 the next. His clients, experienced traders themselves, started bailing out. Jim saw this as a lack of courage. He, on the other hand, was in it for the long haul. This was the big trade. He and Kirby were going to make $10 million. For weeks, he and Kirby would talk on the phone, holding each other's hands, reassuring one another. It's gonna turn. Every piece of news they twisted to fit their "we're okay" scenario. By October, he was underwater. He'd lost all his profits, and then some. He started getting margin calls. He'd wait a few days, hoping for a rally so he wouldn't have to pay. When it didn't come, he started borrowing money from his friends. $400,000. The outward cool began to crack. He was fighting with his wife and kids. He lost 15 pounds. He couldn't sleep. The weekends became a welcome relief, a brief pause from the pain of watching his position bleed out every single day. All he wanted was for the market to rally back to the August highs, and he'd get out. He just wanted to get back to even. But he couldn't get out. Because as long as the position was on, there was hope. The chance, however small, that he could make it all back. If he got out, the chance was gone forever. It was always going to turn, tomorrow. But tomorrow never came. On November 17th, the firm finally, mercifully, pulled the plug. A senior manager walked into his office and started liquidating everything. They took his exchange membership, forcing him to resign from the board of governors. Then they started taking the furniture, the stereo, the levitating desk. He sat there at his desk, crying as they stripped the office bare. He had gone from having everything to having nothing in 75 days. His 15-year career had evaporated. Wandering the halls of the exchange, he couldn't figure out what to do. The only thought that came to him was how to make it right for his family. He had a $1 million life insurance policy. He decided the only way out was to drive his Porsche into a bridge abutment at 100 miles per hour. Everybody knows I drink too much anyway, he thought. It will look like an accident. He got on the Kennedy Expressway, drunk and dazed, looking for a bridge. Then blue lights flashed in his rearview mirror. A police officer walked up to his window. "Any idea how fast you were going, Mr. Paul?" 75. 85? He mumbled. "Try 18, the officer said. He was so out of it, he hadn't even gotten the car out of first gear. He didn't get a speeding ticket. He got a ticket for careless driving, for being a road hazard. That moment saved his life, but his old life was over. He spent the next year in a daze, trying to trade his way back, first in one market, then another. But he couldn't make a living. He slowly came to a painful realization. He had never really been a trader. He had been a good salesman. He had been lucky. He had been in the right place at the right time. But he didn't actually know how to trade. This realization sent him on a quest. If he was going to learn, he was going to learn from the best. He read everything he could find about the great market masters: Warren Buffett, Peter Lynch, Paul Tudor Jones, Bernard Baruch. He was searching for their secret, the one true way to make money. But what he found left him even more confused. The masters didn't agree on anything. One pro, Jim Rogers, would say, "I haven't met a rich technician." Another, Marty Schwartz, would reply, "I used fundamentals for 9 years and then got rich as a technician." One master, John Templeton, would advise, "Diversify your investments." But Warren Buffett would say, "Diversification is a hedge for ignorance. Concentrate your investments." Peter Lynch advised buying more of a stock if it goes down. William O'Neill called that an amateur strategy that can produce serious losses. One said, "Don't bottom fish." Another, Paul Tudor Jones, said, "I believe the very best money is made at the market turns." It was maddening. They were all billionaires, legends in their field, yet their advice was completely contradictory. What one pro advocated, another passionately opposed. How could they all be so successful while doing the opposite of one another? And then it hit him. He was asking the wrong question. He had been searching for the secret to making money. But he realized there was no secret. There are as many ways to make money as there are people in the markets. So he went back and read everything again, but this time he looked for what they had to say about something else: losing. And on that topic they were in perfect, universal agreement. Jim Rogers said, "My basic advice is don't lose money." Marty Schwartz, "The most important thing in making money is not letting your losses get out of hand." Paul Tudor Jones, "Don't focus on making money, focus on protecting what you have." And Warren Buffett's famous 2 rules: Rule 1, never lose money. Rule 2, never forget Rule 1. That was the secret. It wasn't about a magic formula for winning. The masters could all use different, contradictory methods, because they had all mastered the one essential skill. They knew how to control their losses. When their method wasn't working, they weren't in the market. They were on the sidelines with a small, manageable loss. Jim Paul realized his problem wasn't that he didn't know how to make money. he had made $1 million. His problem was that he didn't know how not to lose. This insight was the beginning of his true education. He began to dissect the psychology of loss itself. He realized that losses in the market feel different from other kinds of losses. Why? Because we tie them to our ego. A loss in the market feels like being wrong. It feels like failure. He makes a brilliant distinction between two types of losses: external losses and internal losses. An external loss is objective. If a basketball team loses a game, that's a fact. It's the same for everyone. But an internal loss is subjective. It's when you take that external event and make it personal. It's a loss of self-esteem, of pride. The biggest mistake people make in the markets is turning an external loss, a simple loss of money, into an internal loss, a blow to their ego. How does this happen? It happens the moment you equate being profitable with being right and losing money with being wrong. The moment you do that, your ego is in the game. You're no longer making a decision about money. You're making it about your reputation and pride. You start to take the market personally. And once a loss becomes internal, a terrifying psychological process kicks in. Drawing from the work of Elisabeth Kubler-Ross on the stages of grief, the book shows how a market participant goes through the 5 stages of internal loss. First, there's denial. No, the market can't really be down there. It's just a temporary dip. It'll come back. This was Jim in September 1983, insisting the bull market was still intact. When denial can no longer be sustained, it's replaced by anger. Anger at the market, at your broker, at the news, at your family. This was Jim fighting with his wife and kids, unable to explain the pressure he was under. Next comes bargaining. Please, God, if you just let the market get back to where I broke even, I promise I'll get out and never do this again. This was Jim hoping for just one more rally to save him. Then, depression. The weight of the loss becomes overwhelming. You can't sleep, you can't eat, you lose interest in everything. This was Jim in the fall of 1983, losing 15 pounds and skipping dinner to avoid his family. And finally, there's acceptance. This usually comes when you have no other choice. Either you wake up and exit the position, or more likely, someone forces you out. For Jim, it was the margin clerk liquidating his account. This entire destructive cycle is triggered by one thing: personalizing the loss. The book then dives deeper, explaining that the type of activity you're engaged in makes a huge difference. He distinguishes between a discrete event and a continuous process. A discrete event has a defined ending. A hand of poker, a spin of the roulette wheel, a football game. When it's over, it's over. The loss is finite. But a market position is a continuous process. It has no defined end. It only ends when you decide to end it. This uncertainty is what makes it so psychologically dangerous. It allows you to live in denial indefinitely. You can tell yourself, it's not a loss because I haven't sold it yet. This is the loser's mantra. This is why someone can turn what was supposed to be a short-term trade into a long-term investment once it starts losing money. They're changing the rules in the middle of the game to avoid facing the reality of the loss. So who are we when we enter the markets? The book identifies 5 types of participants, and it's not the activity but your behavior that defines you. An investor seeks a return on capital over a long period. A trader makes a market, trying to profit from the bid-ask spread. A speculator sees the future and takes a calculated risk on capital appreciation. But then there are the other 2, the dangerous ones. A bettor is in it to be right. Their ego is on the line. They have an opinion, and they want the satisfaction of being proven correct. A gambler is in it for the action, the excitement, the thrill. The money is just a way to stay in the game. The disaster happens when you think you're investing or speculating, but your behavior reveals you're actually betting or gambling. And worse, you're doing it in a continuous process where your losses can grow almost infinitely. The final piece of the psychological puzzle is the concept of the crowd. We're all told, don't follow the crowd. But what is the crowd? The book argues it's not a group of people. the crowd is a psychological state. It's a state of emotionalism, where you lose your conscious personality and act on impulse. And an isolated individual can become a crowd of one. If you're sitting alone in your office, glued to the screen, swayed by every news story, making impulsive decisions, you're part of the crowd. You're making a crowd trade. The individual thinks and reasons. The crowd feels and reacts. This happens through a process. First, you're in a state of expectant attention, eager to make money. Then a suggestion is made, a tip, an idea. This leads to contagion. The idea spreads like a virus, and you become hypnotized by it. Finally, there's acceptance, and you act with irresistible impetuosity. This is exactly what happened to Jim with the takeover stock and the bean oil trade. So if the root of all these catastrophic losses is psychological, personalizing outcomes, getting caught in the stages of loss, betting instead of speculating, and becoming part of a crowd, what's the antidote? The answer, the book concludes, is breathtakingly simple yet profoundly difficult. It's a plan. A plan is the one thing that stands between you and the destructive forces of your own psychology. A plan is what separates the professional from the amateur. A plan is what turns a dangerous, continuous process into a manageable, discrete event. But not just any plan. The book reveals the single most important rule for creating a plan that actually works. Most people think about a plan in this order. 1. Where do I get in? Entry. 2. Where is it going? Price objective. 3. And maybe, if I'm disciplined, where do I get out if I'm wrong? Stop loss. This is completely backward. The recipe for a successful plan, the one that protects you from yourself, is to determine the sequence in this order. First, the stop. Before you even think about entering a trade, an investment, or any business venture, you must ask, at what point will I know I'm wrong? Where is my exit? What is my absolute non-negotiable out? This is your stop loss. This is your back door. Only after you've defined your exit do you determine your entry. Your entry point becomes a function of your exit point. The risk you're willing to take determines whether the opportunity is even worth pursuing. And last, you can think about your price objective. Why is this order so critical? Because the last moment of true objectivity you have is before you put your money and your ego on the line. The moment you're in the market, your perception is skewed. You'll start looking for evidence to support your position. You'll be bullish because you're long, not long because you're bullish. By defining your stop loss first, you're making the most important decision during your moment of maximum clarity. You're acknowledging the possibility of loss ahead of time. You're accepting it. In doing so, you short-circuit the 5 stages of internal loss. You go straight to acceptance, without the destructive journey through denial, anger, bargaining, and depression. A plan, with the stop-loss defined first, is the tool that keeps your ego out of the equation. It forces you to be a speculator, not a bettor. It keeps you an individual, not a crowd. It transforms the market from a game of being right or wrong into a business of managing risk. And that, Jim Paul learned after losing everything, is the only game worth playing. What a story. What I find so powerful about what I learned losing $1 million is that it's not a story about trading systems or market analysis. It's a story about human nature. It's about us. The central lesson, that personalizing success is more dangerous than personalizing failure, is one of the most profound insights you'll ever encounter. We're all taught to learn from our mistakes. But who teaches us to be wary of our successes? When things go well, especially if they go well a few times in a row, it's so easy to believe we have some special gift, some Midas touch. We start to believe our involvement guarantees a positive outcome. That's hubris. And as the ancient Greeks knew, hubris is always, eventually, followed by a fall. Jim Paul's journey is a perfect case study. Every time he broke a rule and got away with it, from his fraternity days to his early career, he learned the wrong lesson. He learned that he was exempt. This belief didn't cause the loss, but it ensured that when a loss did come, it would be total. He couldn't accept a small loss, because in his mind he wasn't the kind of person who lost. The idea of a plan, specifically defining your exit first, is a rule for life. Think about it. Before starting a difficult conversation, what's your exit strategy if it goes wrong? Before taking on a huge project at school or work, what are the conditions under which you would say, "This isn't working," and pivot? Before committing to a relationship, what are the non-negotiables that would tell you it's time to walk away? This isn't about being negative or pessimistic. It's about being objective. It's about making your most critical decisions when your mind is clear, not in the heat of an emotional crisis. It's what separates strategy from reaction. Here are a few simple things you can take away from this book and apply today. First, the next time you have a big win, whether it's acing a test, getting a promotion, or just having a great day, take a moment to depersonalize it. Acknowledge the role of luck, timing, and other people. Celebrate the win, but don't let it inflate your ego. Tell yourself, "That was a great outcome," not, "I am a genius." Second, before you start your next significant project, write down your stop-loss. Literally, take out a piece of paper and write, "I will stop doing this if," and then define the conditions. It could be a financial number, a date on the calendar, or a specific outcome that fails to materialize. This act of writing it down makes it real. It externalizes the decision, protecting your future self from emotional choices. And third, pay attention to your language. Notice when you use the words right and wrong to describe an outcome. Are you more concerned with proving your opinion was correct, or with achieving the best result? As the book brilliantly points out, you can be right and still lose money. The goal isn't to be a prophet, it's to be profitable, in every sense of the word. That was a summary of what I learned losing $1 million by Jim Paul and Brendan Moynihan. We've certainly covered the main ideas today, but I have to be honest with you. A summary can only ever be a map. The real treasure is found when you travel the terrain yourself. The power of this book is in the raw, personal, and often painful details of Jim's story. It's a journey, and when you read it, you feel like you're taking it with him. This summary is here to help you decide if this journey is one you want to take. If any of the psychological traps or profound lessons we've discussed today have sparked something in you, then I truly encourage you to pick up a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning concepts. It's an experience that can fundamentally change how you think about success, failure, and yourself. You can find a link to the book in the description below. Also, if you found this journey valuable and want to explore more life-changing books from the Billionaire's Bookshelf, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. That way, you won't miss our next deep dive. Let's keep learning and growing together.